Text is meant to be read, and if we give users a reason to stop reading, they will, and we'll quickly lose them. So we have to give them a pleasurable reading experience, even at first glance. In this video, we'll gain a better understanding of how users read and how readability is influenced by rhythm and the visual organization of text. As Jonathan Snook wrote in his book Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS, web design is about visual hierarchy, and our typography should reflect that. To achieve an effective hierarchy, we need the right balance of similarity and contrast in our text. But first, it has to be readable. When we first land on a page, we don't immediately start reading. We see before we actually read, and we'll usually determine whether or not we want to continue reading, or if we identify with the content, by quickly scanning. We do this by reading word shapes or chunks of headings, paragraphs, lists, and images. So with this in mind, we'll need to give our readers the ability to quickly scan blocks of content. And this will depend on the order and arrangement of type, along with other factors that can influence readability, which can be influenced by many things. The truth is that people don't really want to read all of our content. Most readers are usually looking for reasons to stop reading. Whether it's subconsciously or not, readers will base it on how the text is laid out. So text that is laid out poorly can immediately compromise the overall quality or integrity of our site. When we read, we usually scan across lines of text, while also scanning down to the next line or paragraph. We don't fixate on every word. We only focus on certain words, then fill in the rest. Longer line lengths are difficult to read because it forces us to change eye movement. If it's too long, it's harder to span across the line of text than start at the beginning of the next line. It just disrupts our reading. Line lengths that are way too short have a similar effect because we'll frequently have to jump to the next line, which can be tiresome for our eyes. So a line length is most comfortable at 45 to 75 characters, and that includes the spaces and punctuation. Line heights can also significantly affect readability. The line height is the vertical space between lines of text. So for body text, we should always set a generous line height that is no less than 150% or 1.5 times our text size. The browser's default line height is 1em or 1 times the body font size. This is often too small to be readable, and we don't want to set it too high either because that will also interrupt the reading process. So as we can see here, the more acceptable line height is 1.5 times the text size. Always pay close attention to line height because many factors can affect it. For example, the typeface design, font size, also the weight and case. And the longer the line length, the more line height is usually needed. Readability also suffers when rhythm is broken up by irregular line widths and characters. Text has a natural rhythm that's created when we read. Think of music, where rhythm refers to an orderly movement that can create different moods depending on the tempo and beat. As designers, we can create our own typographic rhythm to break up the monotony of a page. In fact, readability heavily depends on it. The simplest form of rhythm in typography is created by the letters, words, and line spacing in continuous lines of text. For example, adding an image to break up a paragraph and a heading, or adding a different heading color. We can also add emphasis to our block quotes. We can also do this with alignment. An element that's away from the edge seems to have a stronger emphasis because it's no longer competing with the other elements aligned left. This breaks up the hard vertical edge on the page. We'll also need to consider the typographic color of a page. Typographic color is not about the actual color of the text, but rather the density or tone of blocks of text. It's dictated by typeface selection, the font size, also the spaces between letters and lines of text. A good way to test the typographic color of your page is to squint while looking at the text on the screen. It should have a consistent tone and nothing should jump out. If something does, it may be something that will interrupt the flow of reading. A poor line height or text alignment, for example, affects the typographic color of this block of text. Readability is also influenced by text layout. Good reading starts with a good layout. A good blog layout, for example, shapes the visual order of the page with bold headings, images, line rules, and chunks of text. We tend to read things better when they look alike or like they belong together. So we can use similarity and proximity to group content when laying out our text. This is often referred to as chunking. When we chunk text, we merge related elements together. The smaller the space between them, the more they feel like they're related. A chunk of text can be a heading and paragraph, or a group of paragraphs and lists within a section. Sometimes it might help to zoom out and look at the page from afar to see if the chunking of text is working in your layout. It's also important to pay close attention to the negative space around chunks of text. Many readability issues can be resolved with a good balance of white space, which is the space between elements and lines of text and words. It makes it possible for text to breathe and helps us absorb the content better. White space can be used to put emphasis on content by framing it with empty space. Of course, white space doesn't have to be white either, as we can see here in the Black Estate website, which uses much darker colors as its background. Readers also need to understand the role of certain text elements like headings, links, captions, pull quotes, and body text in relation to other elements on the page. So they need to look and feel different from each other in order to reinforce the roles on the page. For example, in Elliott J. Stock's site, the emphasis in the main heading with large, bold text and colors compared to the paragraph text, the dates and comments, and even the code examples below. They each serve different roles on the page, so they're all clearly distinguishable from each other. Every layout needs some form of hierarchy. Many of us only read the parts of a page or article that interest us, and if it lacks a clear visual hierarchy, it makes finding those parts impossible because it hinders our ability to skim through the page. In order for our content to be inviting and enticing to our readers, we'll need a clear visual hierarchy. We can create a visual hierarchy by dividing text elements into various sections of importance that shows the reader where to start reading and where to break. For example, one of the easiest ways to achieve a visual hierarchy is by making sensible use of main headings and subheadings that have enough contrast with each other and the body text. If the headings were too similar to the body text, they'd lose their emphasis and get lost on the page. But we'll need the right balance of hierarchy, as too much hierarchy between too many elements can make text difficult to read in the long run. Once again, Elliott J. Stock's site neatly breaks up and organizes the content into smaller, digestible bits. Simplebits.com also does a nice job of developing the levels of hierarchy with its use of subtle line rules, bold headings, grouped with easy-to-read text, and chunking the dates and categories together over to the left side of the page with a lighter font color, because it's not exactly the most important content on this page. The articles are, and the clear hierarchy dictates that. The treatment of links also influences readability of text, because links tell us where we are, where we've been, and where we can go next. Links need to be easily identifiable and feel different from the rest of the text through color, style, case, or weight. And when a user hovers over or clicks on a link, it should instantly give them feedback, which can be done with duller colors or brighter colors like the IA blog does so well. Just be sure that those same styles are not used for regular text, as it will confuse the user. Regular text should not appear clickable. Links in the main navigation also need to be easily scannable and communicate to the user. We can use caps or italics in the links to promote readability. In a sidebar nav, for example, where we might have a lot of links, we can use vertical spacing and proximity to set the hierarchies, like Smashing Magazine does extremely well by visually chunking navigation links within their respective sections. So all that we've covered here is a function of readability. If all is done effectively, the reader should not be aware of the activity of reading at all, whether they're engaged in casual or sustained reading, and their comprehension and retention of our content will be much greater. Next up, let's take a quick look at the 3 most common approaches to the typographic page. First, the traditional approach uses a lot of center and justified alignment. The text is usually within a frame of white space or margins laid out in 1 or 2 columns. In the traditional approach, the typography is meant to be contemplated, kind of like art. So sometimes we'll see decorations being used, along with script and serif typefaces. The modernist approach will usually have clear-cut margins and edges to steer and guide the eyes through the text, which is usually set in sans serif typefaces. A lot of the times, many columns of text are used, usually aligned to a grid. Then, large headings and stark contrasting colors are used to draw the user's eyes. So the purpose is more utilitarian than decorative. The postmodernist approach is part of the new wave of typography, which breaks many rules of traditional and modernist typography. This is more about challenging the reader to interpret the text on the page. There can be a harmonious blend between 2 or all 3 of these approaches. Just remember that good readability and clarity in the hierarchy is what's most important. You should now have a better grasp of what makes typography visually pleasing using rhythm and tension and visual hierarchies by chunking related text. Next, we're ready to dive into flexible type and ways we can establish vertical rhythm between lines of text.